So there's a lot of therianthropy, which is the magical transformation of people into animals, and that's the sort of overriding conceit of the book. And I'm using transformation into a hyena to talk about the sort of embodied effects of traumatic and sudden loss, but how grief and the language we use when we talk about grief also has this kind of transformational capacity, and it can open sort of new ways of relating to the world and each other, and it's like a trapdoor in language that you can go through where everything becomes sort of more magical and the ordinary rules are suspended. So it's sort of slightly magical, slightly odd. So the main impetus for the collection is Charles Hoyfort, that well-known researcher into anomalous phenomena, for who we have like the Fortean Times. One of his less bonkers things that he came up with, this is in his book Wild Talents in 1932, was that under certain emotional conditions, such as kind of like extreme anger or like grief or sadness, a man could quite literally transform into a hyena. And this is one of the things that he sort of put out there, is this definitely happens in the world somewhere. And I sort of, so he's the kind of main impetus for that idea that you could turn into a hyena. I think I had a moment sort of around about kind of 2020 where I felt feral enough that seemed plausible to me. And so I just sort of ran with that idea. But in general, I'm interested in the feral and feral subjectivity, particularly through the lens of medieval animals and the medieval bestiary and all the wonderful bonkers things that people used to believe about them, and the way they kind of allegorize non-normative animal bodies to tell them something about their own world. Usually not a very positive message. They're usually abjecting them, talking about them as being perverse, amorphous, or sinful. But I also think that they can provide a kind of queer kin and a way of relating to the past and seeing yourself as a queer person in the past. So that's also an interest of mine, and that's something that informs the book. I suppose it's because I have a very omnivorous, eclectic relationship with language, with English in particular. English is the only language that I have, but it very often feels like I have a slight enmity with it, because normally the sort of English that I sort of encountered in my life, kind of like formal English, was administering us. It was telling us what we were entitled to. It was telling us, you know, where we could go, how much of our allotted portion we could get our hands on, and, you know, telling us no, and telling us that, you know, like who we are as sort of like working class outsiders. So I don't like it very much. And then I sort of feel that I would like to be able to access Irish or Shelter, but I only have a handful of words. I'm sort of trying to teach myself, but very haltingly and very badly. So I have to try to make a home in English, and the poetry is a way of forcing that unhomely home to make room for me. So gathering all the tidbits in and sort of assembling them into this thing that it's not English as we know it, but it's something that I can use that doesn't feel like a betrayal, or doesn't feel like it's fighting me so much, maybe. And I think also just because we move around so much, and I think that, you know, working class life is dominated by having to cobble things together. And sort of you take, you know, you do it with your clothing and your fashion and your style, you do it with your cooking, it's in the music. You take bits from all over the shop and you cobble it together to make a whole. And I think that's also what I'm doing in my poetry, that those tactics, they're present in the way that I use language as well. Having been sort of lived everywhere in England, with this joke wherever we drive through anywhere, it's like, oh, I've lived there. Oh yeah, I know that. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, we've been there for how many? And so I've just gathered, so there's so many bits of, you know, kind of just, there's like Scottish dialect in here, there's Irish kind of, Hipper knows Irish slang in there, and there's like, you know, there's sort of like Americanisms from my family in the States as well. It all goes in.